I swear I've never seen anything like it. 1 minute, an old man was sitting by the lake, just laughing, fishing in peace. And 3 minutes later, police sirens, HOA board members screaming, and $2 million hanging in the air. It all started with one fish, and ended with something no one in our neighborhood will ever forget. Hey everyone, welcome back to HOA Stories. I'm Mike. I live in a quiet lakeside community in Georgia. You know, one of those perfect neighborhoods where lawns look cloned, and everyone pretends to love their neighbors, but secretly keeps score. I'm not the kind of guy who likes drama, but when it comes to the HOA, you don't find drama. Drama finds you. If you hate HOAs as much as I do, hit that subscribe button and drop a BOOHOA in the comments. Trust me, by the end of the story, you'll want to. Now let's talk about the day our HOA called the cops on Grandpa Joe for illegal fishing in a lake that technically belonged to all of us. That morning was quiet, the kind of quiet you only get before something goes wrong. Grandpa Joe sat by the lake every morning. Same folding chair, same blue cap, same thermos of coffee. He didn't bother anyone, didn't talk much, just whistled while fishing. I remember walking by with my dog and hearing him laugh after pulling out this huge catfish. He winked and said, "Guess the lake likes me more than the HOA does." I didn't think much of it until I saw her, Pamela, the HOA president, always dressed like she was running for office, always had that smile that said, "I own you." She marched toward Joe like she was storming Normandy, clipboard in hand. He just kept smiling, didn't even flinch. Then came the yelling, "You're trespassing on HOA property." He laughed and said, "Lady, I pay my due same as you." But Pamela wasn't used to being told no, especially not by someone in muddy boots. She pulled out her phone, started filming him, saying he'd be fined, reported, banned. And then she made the call. The cops arrived. 2 of them, confused. They looked at Pamela, then at Joe, then back at the lake like, what the hell did we just walk into? And that's when Joe said something that made everyone freeze. "Go ahead, write your report," he said. "But before you do, maybe check who actually owns this lake." Pamela's smile faltered for the first time. She didn't know. None of us did. The officers went quiet. One of them radioed dispatch. The other took out his phone and started scrolling through property records. I'll never forget Pamela's face when the officer looked up and said, "Ma'am, this lake isn't owned by the HOA." The whole dock went silent. Even the fish stopped jumping. Joe leaned back in his chair, smirking. "Didn't think I'd buy it back in '84, huh?" Pamela's jaw dropped. Turns out, Grandpa Joe wasn't trespassing. He was fishing on his own property. And the HOA just called the cops on the lake's actual owner. What happened next turned that peaceful dock into a courtroom battlefield. Because 3 minutes later, the HOA realized what that call would cost them. So tell me, what do you think Pamela did next? Apologize, or double down like every power-hungry HOA president would? Pamela froze. Her perfect pink lipstick trembled. Her clipboard slipped from her hand and hit the dock with a hollow thud. You could almost hear her pride cracking inside that designer suit. The 2 officers stood awkwardly between them. One whispered to the other, "Guess this is above our pay grade." But Pamela wasn't the kind of woman who backed down. Not in public. Not when half the neighborhood was watching. So she straightened her pearl necklace, plastered that fake HOA smile back on, and said in her sugary, condescending voice, "Well, we'll have to verify that." Joe didn't even look up from his chair. He just said, "Go ahead, sweetheart. You'll find my name on the deed, right under Lakeview Parcel B. Bought it in 1984, before your precious HOA even existed." The officers looked at her like, "Ma'am, you really want to keep going?" She didn't answer. She just walked away fast, heels clacking against the wood, her little chihuahua yipping behind her like backup vocals. Everyone on the dock pretended not to stare, but we all knew Pamela was furious, because she hadn't just lost an argument. She'd lost control. That night, things got worse. I was walking my dog past Joe's house. The light in his living room was on. He was laughing, watching TV, probably telling his old fishing buddies about what happened. Then I saw Pamela's car, parked at the edge of the cul-de-sac, engine off, headlights dimmed. She was sitting inside, just staring at his house, like she was planning something. It creeped me out. I swear, HOAs can turn normal people into villains. The next morning, Joe's mailbox was open. Inside was a bright red envelope stamped, "Urgent HOA violation notice." Apparently, he'd broken landscaping rules for leaving a fishing chair visible from the street. A chair. Joe just laughed. "This is war," he said. A few days later, Pamela called an emergency HOA meeting. Of course, I went. Everyone did, even the ones who pretended not to care. The clubhouse smelled like burnt coffee and fake flowers. Pamela stood at the front in her pink suit, smiling like she was running the FBI. "Neighbors," she said sweetly, "we have a legal matter to discuss. A resident has made false ownership claims regarding the community lake." Joe walked in mid-sentence, laid down a thick folder on the table. Property documents, old maps, tax receipts. He didn't say a word, just looked her dead in the eye and grinned. Pamela's smile cracked again. She flipped through the pages, and her face turned pale, because right there, black ink on yellowed paper, was proof. The HOA had been collecting lake maintenance fees for nearly 15 years, on property they didn't even own. Every fine, every fishing violation, every boat permit, all illegal. And if that wasn't bad enough, Joe had something else in his folder. Letters from homeowners who'd been fined for fishing, copies of canceled checks, and emails where Pamela had threatened legal action for unauthorized use. The room went silent. The HOA lawyer leaned over and whispered something in her ear. Her face went red, then white. Joe finally spoke. "Now about those $2 million. Pamela blinked. "2 what?" Joe leaned back in his chair, calm as ever. "You collected fees on my property for 15 years. That's about $120,000 per year, if you add interest, penalties, emotional damages, and legal exposure." He looked at the lawyer. "You can do the math." The lawyer swallowed hard. Pamela's hand shook as she reached for her water bottle. People in the room started whispering, some recording on their phones, others hiding smiles behind fake coughs. Joe continued, "I don't want your money. Not yet. I want something better." Pamela leaned forward, voice cracking. "What do you mean?" "I want the HOA dissolved," Joe said, "and I want every fine you ever issued refunded. Every last cent." The lawyer tried to intervene. "That's not how it works, sir." Joe interrupted. "Then I'll see you all in court. My lawyer's already drafting the case. It'll be public record, and I'll make sure every news station from Atlanta to DC covers how your HOA scammed retirees and veterans." The room erupted. Gasps, whispers, someone even clapped. Pamela just sat there frozen, her perfect world unraveling in front of everyone. The next day, the neighborhood felt different. Quiet again, but in a different way. Like everyone was holding their breath, waiting for what would happen next. Pamela didn't leave her house for 3 days. Her for sale sign went up on the 4th. Joe, he was back on the dock. Same chair, same hat, same thermos. When I passed by, he smiled. "Guess I caught something bigger than fish this time," he said. I laughed, but deep down, I knew it wasn't over. Because people like Pamela, they don't disappear quietly. They regroup. They plot. And when the next HOA election came around, her name was still on the ballot. So tell me, if you were Grandpa Joe, would you forgive her? Or would you let karma do the rest? For a few weeks, things were quiet again. Too quiet. Pamela's for sale sign stayed on her front lawn, like a scar she refused to remove. But everyone knew she hadn't actually moved out. She was still there, curtains always closed, lights on at odd hours. And when the mailman stopped at her house, he never looked happy walking back. Grandpa Joe. He was living his best life. Fishing every morning, waving at the cops who used to question him, and making sure everyone in the HOA got free catfish every Friday. People loved him. They started calling him the Lake King. But deep down, I could tell he was waiting for the next punch, because Pamela wasn't the kind of woman to lose gracefully. And I was right. One morning, Joe knocked on my door holding a thick envelope. He was grinning, but his eyes looked tired. "Got something funny," he said, and handed it to me. Inside were 3 pages stamped with Superior Court of Georgia. Pamela had filed a lawsuit. She was suing him for emotional distress, defamation, and unauthorized use of HOA facilities. I couldn't help it. I laughed so hard my coffee spilled. "She's suing you," I said. "She's out of her mind." Joe shrugged. "She's desperate. That's how you know you're winning." 2 days later, the news trucks showed up. Apparently, someone had leaked the story. Local headlines read, "Elderly man sues HOA after they call cops on him, and wins. Lake belongs to Grandpa. HOA faces legal action." Pamela's name was everywhere. She went from being the proud HOA president to the face of suburban greed. But instead of hiding, she doubled down. She started walking the neighborhood again, putting on her pastel suits, knocking on doors with that fake smile, asking for support to rebuild the HOA's reputation. One neighbor told me she cried on his porch, said Joe was ruining her life. That same night, her lawyer filed another claim, accusing Joe of disrupting HOA operations and community morale. Community morale, like this was a military base or something. Joe didn't respond publicly. He just went fishing. But when I visited him that weekend, I saw what he was really doing. Inside his living room were piles of folders, old HOA meeting notes, emails, receipts, copies of letters Pamela had sent over the years. He'd been collecting them, every single one. "This isn't about fishing anymore," he said. "She's been using HOA funds for personal expenses. Look at this, $4,000 administrative travel to Miami. HOA doesn't even host anything there." I flipped through more papers. There were dozens of them. Pamela's HOA power trips suddenly looked a lot like embezzlement. Joe smiled quietly. I told her she'd regret that phone call. A week later, Pamela called another meeting. She said it was about restoring order. But when people walked into the clubhouse, they didn't see her standing at the podium. They saw Joe. He'd legally requested to speak, and by HOA law, they couldn't stop him. He brought a projector, hooked it to his laptop, and started showing emails, one after another. HOA funds spent on luxury furniture, weekend spa trips, $800 dinners, all charged under community development. The room went dead silent. Then Joe played an audio clip. Pamela's voice. "You think anyone's going to find out? Please. These people can barely read a budget sheet." Gasps. Phones came out. Someone whispered, "Oh, she's done." Pamela stormed into the room halfway through, face red, eyes wide. "Turn that off," she screamed. But Joe didn't even look at her. He said, "Sit down, Pam. You're about to learn what happens when you pick the wrong fisherman." By the next morning, her lawyer dropped her case. The HOA board resigned, and a special election was announced. Pamela was banned from all meetings pending investigation. Her for sale sign came down, and a bank foreclosure one went up instead. Joe didn't celebrate. He just went fishing again. Same chair, same thermos, same calm smile. I sat next to him that evening. Sunset turning the lake gold. He looked at the water and said, "People think I got revenge, but this ain't revenge. It's balance." I didn't know what he meant then. But later that night, I saw the news again. The HOA's insurance had denied their coverage. Pamela's personal assets were being audited, and they owed over $2 million in legal damages and penalties. The same number she had laughed at when Joe said it the first time. The next morning, Pamela's house was empty. Just a for sale sign swinging in the wind. Her chihuahua barking from behind the fence, like it was confused who it belonged to now. Joe didn't say a word. He just looked at her old house and whispered, "Guess the lake finally caught her too." The sun was rising over the water. Everything looked peaceful again. The kind of peace that only comes after storm. And I realized something about our little neighborhood. It wasn't the HOA that made it toxic. It was the power people gave to the wrong person. Now, every time I pass by that dock, I wonder how far someone's pride can take them before it drags them under. So tell me, if you were in Pamela's place, would you admit defeat? Or keep fighting until you drowned in your own pride? For a while, everything felt calm again. Pamela was gone. The HOA board had resigned, and Grandpa Joe had become a local legend. People waved to him when they drove by. Kids yelled "Lake King" when they saw him fishing. Even the cops who once questioned him stopped for selfies. It felt like justice. Real simple, sweet justice. But peace in a neighborhood like ours never lasts long. Because when you remove a tyrant, something worse always tries to take her place. A few months later, we got a letter in the mail. Special HOA meeting. Discussion of new board formation. I laughed out loud when I saw it. We were finally free, and someone wanted to bring the HOA back. Joe looked at me and said, "Power's like weeds, kid. You pull one, two more grow back." He was right. That Saturday, the meeting room was full again. Everyone came, out of curiosity mostly. But when I saw who was standing at the front, my stomach dropped. It was Terry Collins, Pamela's old vice president. Tall guy, expensive watch, fake smile. The kind of man who talked like every sentence was a sales pitch. He started with, "Neighbors, I know the past few months have been difficult, but we need structure again. Order. The lake needs maintenance. We need leadership." He said all the right words, but something in his tone felt slippery. Joe was sitting at the back, hat pulled low, arms crossed. When the vote happened, most people didn't even raise their hands. But Terry's little group of loyalists did. And just like that, the HOA was back. The next week, signs started appearing again. Keep off the lake without authorization. New community fishing hours. Boat registration required. I couldn't believe it. It was like Pamela's ghost was back, wearing a man's face. Joe didn't say much at first, but every time I walked by, I could feel his patience thinning. One evening, I saw him sitting on his porch with a notebook. He wasn't fishing. He was writing. "What are you doing, Joe?" I asked. He smiled without looking up. "Taking notes. You never know when history might repeat itself." A few days later, Joe got another letter. It said, "Unauthorized signage placement and lake activity. Fined $500. He laughed. "Guess Terry wants his turn on the chopping block." He paid the fine immediately. No argument. No fight. But he added a note on the check that said, "Paid under protest. See you soon." Word spread fast. People started whispering. Maybe Joe was giving up. Maybe he was tired. But what they didn't know is that Grandpa Joe was planning something brilliant. He called it revenge by compliance. He read every HOA rule, every bylaw, every tiny line that most people ignored. And then, he started following them. Perfectly. His mailbox height, exactly regulation. His grass length, precisely measured. His trash bins, color-coded to match HOA standards. He even painted his fence the approved neutral beige. Then took pictures as proof. Soon other neighbors started copying him. A kind of silent rebellion. Dozens of homes looking exactly the same. Perfectly dull. Perfectly compliant. The neighborhood started looking like a copy-paste suburb from a video game. It drove Terry insane. He called another meeting. Compliance has gone too far, he said. The rules are being exploited. Joe raised his hand and said, "Can't exploit what's written in your own rulebook, son." People laughed. Even Terry's friends couldn't hide it. A week later, Terry tried to hit back. He sent out new HOA rules. Over 60 pages of them. Most of them ridiculous. Like, no lawn ornaments taller than 8 inches. No American flags larger than 3 by 5 feet. No fishing after 6 p.m. even on private lots. That last one was aimed directly at Joe. But this time, Joe didn't fight it with sarcasm. He fought it with paperwork. He filed an official petition for rule review with the county clerk. Under a state law that allowed residents to challenge HOA restrictions affecting private property. And guess what? The county sided with him. Not only that, they declared half of the HOA's new rules invalid, because they weren't filed properly under state compliance codes. The HOA got fined. Not Joe. Terry's face turned purple when he found out. 2 weeks later, an email went viral around the neighborhood. A neighbor had leaked the HOA's internal chat logs. In them, Terry was caught bragging about using HOA funds to teach the old man a lesson. That was the end of him. The board disbanded again. The neighborhood erupted in laughter and relief. And Joe, he threw a barbecue by the lake. Invited everyone. Even the cops came by to eat. He stood up at sunset and said, "You can't control nature. You can't control people. But you can control who you let sit at the head of the table." Everyone cheered. But then, just as things were starting to feel peaceful again, a black SUV pulled up near the lake. A man in a gray suit stepped out, looked around, and started taking pictures of the water. Joe frowned. "Who's that?" I asked. He didn't answer. He just said, "Something tells me this isn't over." So tell me, do you think that man was another HOA lawyer? Or someone who had their eyes on the lake for something much, much bigger? The man in the gray suit didn't say a word that day. He just stood there, taking pictures of the lake, measuring the shoreline with a small device, writing in a black notebook. Joe watched him the whole time. Didn't move. Didn't speak. Just tapped his fingers on the porch rail. After a while, the man got back in his SUV and drove off. No logo on the car. No plates on the front. Just a faint reflection of something official on the dashboard. That night, Joe didn't sleep. I saw the light under his door at 3 a.m. He was printing papers, highlighting things, maps, documents, old property surveys. When I asked what was going on, he said, "Someone's sniffing around our water, kid, and I want to know why." A few days later, an envelope showed up in the mailbox. No return address. Just a wax seal with the letter A stamped into it. Inside was a single sheet. Notice of Environmental Evaluation, Lake Assessment Project, Phase 1. Under that it said, "Authorized by Iquitas Holdings, LLC." Joe muttered, "Never heard of them." He started digging online. Turns out Iquitas was a real estate investment group. They bought old neighborhoods, drained their lakes, and rebuilt luxury housing over them. Our lake wasn't just a pond. It was a gold mine. The next morning, heavy trucks rolled in. Surveyors, contractors, men in hard hats walking along the waterline. placing red flags in the soil. The neighbors gathered, confused and angry. What's going on? Are they building something? Didn't the HOA say the lake was private? Terry was gone, so no one had answers. But Joe had proof. He called everyone to his porch that night, pulled out a folder thicker than a Bible. "This right here," he said, tapping the folder, "is every document from the original county deed. This lake was protected land. You can't sell it. You can't drain it. Not without federal review." Someone asked, "Then how did they get permission?" Joe sighed. "That's the thing, they didn't." The next day, he went down to the construction site and confronted the foreman. "Who gave you the green light?" Joe asked. The foreman shrugged. "Orders came from Ikita's HQ. Said the new HOA president signed the permit." Joe froze. New president. The man pointed toward a black sedan parked nearby. Inside was Pamela. She rolled the window down slowly. Same perfect hair. Same smug grin. "Well," she said softly, "look who's still fishing." I'll never forget the way Joe's face changed. Not anger. Not fear. Just disbelief. "You were disbarred from the board," he said. "You can't sign anything." "Oh, I didn't sign," Pamela said. "My husband did. Terry Collins. He works for Ikita's now." The pieces fell together like dominoes. The HOA collapse. The new rules. The mysterious company. It had all been a setup. That night, Joe called a lawyer friend from the city. A quiet, serious man named Reeves who handled land disputes. Reeves came the next morning. He took one look at the red survey flags and said, "They're testing for mineral content. If there's lithium or rare earth deposits under the lake, this isn't about real estate, it's about extraction." I didn't even know lakes could be worth that much. But Joe did. And he wasn't about to let them steal it. He turned his house into a war room. Documents on every wall. Old maps showing the lake boundaries. A giant whiteboard that said, in thick black marker, "Who really owns the water?" Reeves filed an injunction with the county court, temporarily freezing all Ikita's operations near the lake. For a moment, it looked like we'd stopped them. But 2 nights later, someone cut the power to Joe's house. Then came the noise. Engines in the dark. Headlights flashing across the water. Voices shouting orders. When I ran outside, I saw trucks backed up to the lake. Pumps running. They were draining the water. Joe grabbed his shotgun, not loaded, just for warning, and walked out onto the porch. "Cut those pumps now," he yelled. A man in a yellow vest yelled back. "Private project. Stay back, old man." Joe fired a single shot into the air. The echo rolled over the water like thunder. The truck stopped. For a second, it was dead silent. Then someone yelled, "Call the cops." When the police arrived, they found Joe standing knee-deep in the mud, holding a soaked folder of documents over his head like a flag. He was shaking, drenched, furious. But when they asked what he was doing, he said calmly, "Protecting federal land, and I've got the paperwork to prove it." The cops didn't arrest him this time. They just looked at each other and called their supervisor. Within hours, the county inspector showed up. He went through Joe's documents, checked his seals and signatures, and then he said something I'll never forget. "This lake is under a federal conservation easement. Any alteration is a felony offense." Everyone froze. Even the Ikita's workers packed up and left. Pamela's SUV disappeared the next morning. By the end of the week, the story hit local news. Elderly veteran stops illegal lake drainage project. The clip went viral again. Joe became a symbol of small-town resistance. But when reporters asked him for a comment, he just smiled and said, "Don't thank me. Thank the lake. It remembers who it belongs to." For a while, it looked like the war was over. But one evening, I noticed something strange. Joe was staring out at the water again. Not peaceful this time. Nervous. When I asked what was wrong, he said quietly, "They didn't come for the water this time, but they'll be back for what's under it." I frowned. "What's under it?" He didn't answer. He just kept watching the ripples as the sun went down. "So tell me, what do you think Joe meant? What could be hidden beneath that old lake that's worth millions, and worth starting a war over?" After that night, something in Joe changed. He wasn't angry anymore. He was quiet, like a man who finally solved the puzzle, but didn't like the picture he saw. Every morning, he sat by the lake with his old coffee mug, staring at the water, watching the ripples like they were hiding secrets. The whole neighborhood thought it was over. The trucks were gone. Pamela vanished, and the county even sent a letter confirming the lake was safe from development. But Joe didn't believe it. He kept saying they wouldn't walk away from a $2 million plan, not unless they found something bigger. One afternoon, I heard a knock on my door. It was Joe, holding a metal box covered in rust and lake mud. He said, "Help me open this." We pried it open in my garage. Inside were old photographs, black and white, taken decades ago. They showed the same lake, but smaller. And in one photo, there were people standing knee-deep in it, wearing military uniforms. At first, I thought it was just an old training site. But then Joe pulled out a folded blueprint. The header read, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, Project Silverwell, 1952. Project Silverwell, Joe said slowly. That's what's buried under this lake. He laid the blueprint on the workbench. It showed underground tunnels, concrete chambers, metal pipelines that went straight under the neighborhood. "What the hell is this?" I whispered. He pointed at a section labeled, Chemical Storage Containment Vault. Then he looked at me and said, "This wasn't a lake, kid. It was a burial site. The Army flooded it after an accident." Joe told me his father worked construction back in the 50s. Said he once mentioned a job gone bad near the valley. Men got sick. Some disappeared. It was never in the papers. Back then, people just moved on. But Joe never forgot that story. And now he had proof. The next morning, Joe took those photos and blueprints straight to the county office. But when he got there, the clerk told him something strange. All land files for the lake area were temporarily sealed, by court order, signed by an attorney representing, you guessed it, Iquitas Holdings. Joe laughed right there in the lobby. "They're not developers," he said. "They're cover. They want to dig this up before anyone realizes what's down there." That night, Joe called a meeting at my house. He showed the photos to everyone in the neighborhood, told them the whole story. Most of them didn't believe him. They said it sounded like a conspiracy, that maybe he was seeing ghosts of the past. But then, he showed them one more photo, a recent one, a drone shot he took 2 days before. It showed fresh tire marks behind the HOA clubhouse, leading to the lake's restricted side. And right there in the mud was a logo, barely visible, spray-painted in white H. Iquitas Holdings. The next day, Joe and I drove down there ourselves. The back of the lake, the part no one visits. We found a small shed covered in vines, locked tight. Joe smashed the lock with a hammer. Inside was a generator, a ladder leading underground, and a faint humming noise from below. He looked at me. I shook my head, but he started climbing anyway. The tunnel was narrow, cold, smelled like metal and earth. We reached a chamber with concrete walls and a massive sealed door with the same logo, H. Joe touched it. It was warm. Then he saw a small label burned into the concrete. Silverwell, Containment Access 03. Joe whispered, "They found it." He turned back toward the ladder, but before we could climb out, we heard voices above. Pamela's voice. "I told you he'd come here," she said. Then footsteps. Multiple men. Heavy boots. Joe motioned for me to stay quiet. Through the crack in the wooden floor above, we saw Pamela and two men in black suits. She was holding a phone, talking to someone. "Yes, sir. The old man found the vault, but we'll handle it. He doesn't have the full documents." Joe clenched his fists, whispered, "They're going to bury this again." We waited until they left. When we climbed out, Joe looked shaken. He didn't say anything on the drive home, just stared out the window, muttering, "They're covering up a military dump under a neighborhood and calling it private property." He didn't sleep that night either. The next morning, I found him sitting on his porch, scribbling in his notebook. "I'm not letting them hide this," he said. "They ruined families back then. They'll ruin this one now if they dig deeper." By noon, Joe had sent every document, photo, and video to a local journalist, a woman named Nora Hayes. She ran a small investigative blog that specialized in land corruption cases. She agreed to meet Joe by the lake that evening. He put on his old fishing jacket, packed his folder, and said, "If I don't come back, tell the truth for me." I tried to stop him, but he just smiled and said, "Don't worry, the lake protects its own." He walked toward the water as the sun went down. That was the last time I saw him. When I went looking that night, his fishing chair was still there, his mug, his hat, but Joe was gone. The police searched for 2 days. The divers found nothing, no sign of struggle, no footprints beyond the shoreline. Just calm, still water, like it swallowed him whole. A week later, Nora Hayes published the story anyway. It spread like wildfire. Thousands of shares, comments, people asking who Joe was. The county launched an investigation. Ikita's offices were suddenly under maintenance. Pamela and Terry Collins disappeared. And the lake, it was sealed off completely. Barbed wire. No trespassing signs. New floodlights that stayed on all night. Sometimes I still walk down there at dusk. When the light hits the water just right, you can see something metallic glinting below the surface, like a reflection that isn't a reflection. And sometimes, I swear I hear a voice whisper from the reeds, "Don't fish too deep, kid, you might pull up the truth." So tell me, do you think Joe vanished because of what he found? Or did the lake finally take back what was buried inside it? It's been 6 months since Joe disappeared. The lake's still there, still quiet, but the air feels heavier now, like it's holding secrets under the surface. They fenced it off completely. Floodlights all around it. Signs that say federal property, no trespassing. But every night, those lights flicker, and I swear I can still hear the hum from under the water. People in the neighborhood don't talk about it anymore. They cut their lawns, wave politely, pretend nothing happened. But we all know something did. Then one morning, everything changed again. I woke up to the sound of helicopters. News vans lined the streets. Police cars. FBI trucks. They had tents near the lake. Men in hazmat suits walking around, carrying metal cases and sensors. Pamela's house was surrounded too. Agents went in, came out with boxes of papers. She was let out in handcuffs. No makeup this time. No smile. Someone shouted, "What's going on?" One of the agents said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Federal investigation. Unauthorized hazardous waste burial." Everyone gasped. Joe was right all along. Turns out, Project Silverwell wasn't just an old military site. It was toxic. Back in the 50s, they dumped barrels of chemical waste there. When the project went wrong, they flooded the area to hide it. Decades later, Ikita's bought the land, not realizing what they were sitting on. They only found out after testing the soil. And instead of reporting it, they tried to cover it up. Terry Collins, Pamela's husband, was on their payroll. He used HOA funds to restructure lake management, which was just code for cover the contamination. The EPA ran tests for weeks. What they found made national headlines. Toxic waste site hidden beneath suburban neighborhood. Elderly residents' tip leads to $2 million federal fine. $2 million. That's how much the HOA was fined for failing to disclose environmental risk. Their insurance collapsed. Ikita's executives resigned. Pamela and Terry faced federal charges for fraud and conspiracy. And the lake? The government declared it protected land again. No fishing. No building. No selling. Joe saved it, even if it cost him everything. The news channels called him a hero. The veteran who stood up to the HOA. The man who fought for his lake. But there was one thing no one could explain. 2 weeks after his disappearance, divers found a small metal box buried near the shore. Inside was a handwritten note, and a photo of Joe smiling by the water. The note said, "If you're reading this, then truth floats faster than lies. Don't let them drown it again." Under that, a signature, Joseph Allen Brooks, and taped beside it, a small key. At first, no one knew what the key was for, until the county auditor opened a safety deposit box under Joe's name. Inside were property deeds from 1953, signed by the original landowners, transferring ownership of the lakebed to a private trust. Guess who the trustee was? Joe Brooks. He had quietly inherited it decades ago. Never mentioned it. Never sold it. The lake legally belonged to him, which meant when the HOA tried to drain it, they were trespassing on private property. That's why they owed the fine. That's why the title of the news story read, "HOA called cops on Grandpa for private lake fishing. Now they owe $2 million. After the chaos died down, I walked back to Joe's porch one last time. His old fishing chair was still there, covered in dust. The coffee mug still half full of rainwater. I sat down, looked out at the lake. The surface was calm, peaceful, but in the center, there was a single ripple, moving slowly, like someone had just cast a line. I smiled and whispered, "Nice catch, old man." Now the HOA is gone. The houses around the lake are up for sale. The sign out front says Silver Well Estates, closed for remediation. Sometimes, when the moon is high and the wind is still, you can see a faint glow under the water, like something buried deep is finally resting easy. The neighborhood moved on, but I never did, because the lake isn't just water anymore. It's a story. Joe's story. A story about one stubborn man who fought greed, lies, and the system, armed with nothing but truth and a fishing rod. So tell me, do you think Joe really disappeared that night? Or is he still out there, watching over his lake, waiting for the next person who dares to call it private?